So hi everybody, very excited today to chat with Tim Proom from Tarsus, one of our long-time customers. And the reason I'm really excited about this is that quite often when we're out in the field talking to prospective customers or existing customers, the question comes up around, well, what does the journey for implementing WMS look like? What are the benefits? What are the challenges, and what should we expect in the long term? So Tim, being a battle-hardened veteran of this, has kindly agreed to take us through his experience over the past 4.5 years, I think it is, Tim, around implementation, optimization, and then how the use of the Manhattan WMS has really helped improve and optimize Tarsus's business. So what we're going to try and do in this series is break it into a 3 or 4 part series, because Tim's got a lot to tell, and I think there's a lot that people out there can learn from Tim's experiences. But rather than make this a 25-30 minute long video, breaking into 3 or 4 digestible parts, hopefully be really helpful to everybody out there. And the way that we're going to try and do this is under 3 core subheadings. So, initially, like, what drove Tarsus to think about supply chain optimization? And what did the journey to WMS and supply chain stabilization look like? That in itself is a fairly enormous task. Then we'll jump into really the crux of the benefits that Tarsus were able to achieve and how they achieve those, really under two subheadings, optimization and culture change. And I think Tim and the team at Tarsus really did a great job around that. And I think those experiences will be really valuable to everybody out there. And then the third part will be around, where are you now, and what are your plans for the future, and what have you been able to do as a result of those optimization and business process improvements that you've been able to put in place. So thank you so much, Tim, for agreeing to share your experiences with the world, I guess. And maybe let's just kick off a little bit and talk about yourself and why Tarsus went on this journey.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And it's always, I've found it helpful as we've gone along this journey to be able to help and encourage other customers that are going through, a similar journey to what we went through. So really excited to be with you today and with the viewers as well.
No, excellent. So, yeah, maybe you can just, I mean, you've got an interesting story of when you joined Tarsus in the life cycle of WMS implementation, but maybe you can tell that and just a bit of backstory as to why Tarsus went on that journey for supply chain optimization.
Yeah, so what a lot of people who have been to the Manhattan Scale conferences would know that I had the fortune of starting at Tarsus the week of the rollout of the WMS, which was a very exciting time. Prior to me arriving, Tarsus had a strategic decision a couple of years prior to that, to say that supply chain in the tech industry as it was at that time, where the margins were ever decreasing, they saw supply chain as a strategic move that could possibly turn into a sellable service at a point. And thought that would be a strategic advantage in the industry. So that was the vision prior to me starting. They had gone down the route of evaluating all the different role players within the WMS industry, and they had eventually settled with Manhattan Scale, obviously because it is out and out, the best system or platform in the world, and also was quite prominent in the tech industry at that time as well. So it was kind of a no-brainer to go with Manhattan Scale. And yeah, so for me, I started with, the week of that rollout, which was very interesting. I'd come from a different industry altogether as well. So not only was I new to Tarsus and new to Manhattan Scale, I was also new to all the people that were in this 26,000 square meter facility, and the product that was going to flow from here as well. So an interesting time. What we had was that week, what I found was, I was going from meeting to meeting. I was just a new guy. I was attending, trying to catch up and learn as much as possible. And it all felt pretty normal. There was a bit of excitement in the air. There was a lot of confidence around that This take-on was going to be the game changer, and everything was going to go perfectly well. And we went then into the Friday night where we started to do the take-on. It took us majority of the weekend. There was 30,000 bin locations to take on. And when I say the take-on, that was scanning every product in there, adding quantities, serial numbers where necessary on selected products. And then basically then having to try and match that against the original ERP, that was the master of inventory at that time. So ultimately a stock take on steroids, if you will. So not only bin locations, but also products, serial numbers, and quantity. So quite a major one. And that's where it started. By the Sunday evening, we had completed the take on. And we thought we had done that superbly well. And then we took a few of the orders that we had held back on the Friday evening, and we waived those on Sunday night to just get a feel for the system and see where we were at. Those we were able to pick, and we kind of went home, closed the doors, and thought everything would be amazing on Monday. Luckily, we got a good sleep on Sunday night, because Monday the fun started.
Yeah, maybe tell us a little bit about that, Tim.
So what we found is that as we were getting the orders in, so the orders were coming in as normal, and it is a big warehouse. It does have a big flow through. And we just found orders starting to get stuck. And that became the terminology. It was a very technical term, but the products were getting stuck, the orders. There was two main problems that were evident right at that time, or possibly three. It was two evidently at that time, but a third that was creating it. The first one was the serial tracking. I think that prior to me starting in the lead up to it, I think that there was sort of a misunderstanding from a Tarsus perspective as to what full serial tracking meant. So I think that the business rule had been from our big vendors, the big tech vendors, was to say that they want full serial tracking. And there's very good reason for that, but I think that the understanding of what full serial tracking is for a big vendor, as opposed to what it meant in Manhattan scale, were very different things. And so what it meant was, every time that you moved a product in Manhattan scale, whether it was from one bin to another bin location, you ended up with a serial scanning. And then what we had found at that time was that from the take on, the guys who had done the serial scanning didn't quite know what they were supposed to be scanning, and had started to create this database of junk, really. So that old adage of garbage in, garbage out really started to play dividends there. So what we had to do is urgently get back to the vendors and understand exactly what it is that they wanted. And what we then found was that they either wanted just an inbound scan and an outbound scan, or just an outbound scan, or nothing at all. What we were doing was full serial tracking, which meant, as I described just earlier, was to say that if I moved it from bin location to bin location, or virtual warehouse to virtual warehouse, I was having to enact those scans. That meant that we had all of these, this volume of orders stopped in its tracks and not being able to move anywhere. So that was probably the big one. The second one was we had created a consolidation area, because you have multiple locations within the warehouse. What we were doing is exacting different picks from different portions of the warehouse, and then bringing them to a single consolidation area. In that consolidation area, you would match box 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3, and we were consistently missing a box. So we may have been missing number 1 or 2 or 3 of 3, and so therefore you could just never conclude that order. You know, the business process was to conclude that order, consolidate that order, and then hand it over to the courier partner in its entirety. We couldn't part ship, and we couldn't part hand over. So you started creating this environment. And at that time, we were doing probably 2,500 to 3,000 orders a day. You know, with boxes, you know, it's a 2-to-1 relationship. So 2,500 orders equaled 5,000 boxes. So you can imagine how that started to pile up. And especially as this thing, you know, as the issue just compounded, we just ended up with boxes everywhere. It was a fun time.
What was the main reason there, Tim, that you couldn't complete the pick process? What was really holding that back?
Yeah, so the challenge for me, and I think this is kind of was the, you know, the blessing, I guess, of coming in new and fresh eyes and not having a day to day to have to work to. I could simply focus on a you know, what was broken and what was working. And so I was able to draw a life cycle of a product at that time, and then just start trying to understand where the challenges were. And what we did is we followed that all the way backwards. You know, we kind of reversed the supply chain or the value chain. And what I found more and more was that the inaccuracies of inventory was actually causing the challenge in those boxes, because obviously if the system said a product existed in bin location A, and they get to A and that doesn't exist, obviously they can't complete that pick. And so we had to then just start trying to understand why we had these massive discrepancies in inventory. So we started to go backwards further and further into the supply chain, all the way back to the GRV. The GRV was problematic, and also the master data creation, which also came as part of the GRV process on the first take on of a product. So where people were creating in the master data or the UOMs of a product incorrectly, what that meant is that the system was trying to locate it incorrectly. So it was looking at location sizes or location types that didn't fit the product. So you had the put away MHE drivers taking that to a bin location that was totally missized. So those guys would then, because of the culture in the place, and we can talk to that a little bit in a moment, because of the culture of the place, those MHE drivers would simply put that pallet of stock onto the floor or put it into a bin location that was more suited to it, but without doing that systematically, without reporting that back into an inventory team, etc. So that was really hard, and what that translated into was stock take after stock take after stock take until we got that correct. Disciplinary measures, and then also in one of the optimization points that we'll talk to was actually the zoning of the warehouse, and that was a major changer. We'll talk to that probably in a little bit more detail in that optimization phase of our discussion, Mike.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like a lot of the historical processes from before you had a WMS existed with your team, right? And that's probably part of the training and change process, right?
Yeah. And so that was the thing for me, is not coming in with any sort of preconceived ideas about who were good performers and who were bad performers. In fact, if you had asked me a couple of weeks into the rollout, I would have given you a pretty different view of some of the staff and the culture and the performance indicators per person than the legacy people from the business would have given you. Some of the people who they told me were amazing were the ones who were really underperforming. And when I say that with respect, I don't mean it with any disrespect. The guys, they claimed up a little bit. There was a lot of nervousness. You've got to remember that in these environments that guys have closed off on a Friday night doing job A and coming to work on Monday to now start doing job B. And they were quite unsure of how they were going to do it. And I don't think that the communication lines were open enough to be able to come and say, you know what, Michael or Tim, this is a challenge for me. This is not working. So people were traditionally used to sort of making up their own mind as to how things should be fixed. And they were trying to enact those old processes. So it's exactly what you're saying is, you know, going into a new system environment, dragging along, kicking and screaming, dragging along old processes, the traditional processes. It was a really difficult time.